Auzu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum viewers. I'm your host FAIZA with a prayer. May Allah keep you all safe, healthy, and blessed, and fill this world with peace and justice, and hasten the appearance of Imam of our time. Inshallah, Ameen. Today, the topic we will be discussing is related to the situation within the Middle East. We can see that after Yahya Sinwar's assassination last week, situation is getting like towards in different ways. It's getting in like it looks like Netanyahu has achieved his basic goal to kill and finish Hamas leaders, and now what he wants and what are his goals and where he is moving, and is he going to have his captives back from Hamas, and if he is about to do that, how he would achieve this goal, because we can see that today Mr. Netanyahu he met Blinken, Secretary of State of America, and they discussed like the situation in the Middle East. So what they have achieved so far out after the assassination of Yahya Sinwar assassination, and what are they going to achieve in future. This is a door towards the end of escalation within the region, or it is the door towards further escalation, because in today's discussion Netanyahu wanted US to join their forces for further war towards further war, and they wanted to attack obviously Iran, so they wanted them to be prepared for that, for instance. So what is going to happen in future, so we will be discussing that with our honorable guest. I'll move on to our guest. We do have very respectable guest, Farah Hughes. He is a journalist, author, and an activist, and we do have Sister Batul with us. Assalamu alaikum, and thank you so much for joining us today. Really honored to have you both on the show. Farah, you have joined us today for the first time, and you just were discussing that you have also been on the convention related to Quds as well. So how do you see the situation after whole 1 year of humanitarian crisis in Gaza, in Lebanon? What do you think Netanyahu have achieved so far, and do you think that Hamas is finished after Yahya Sinwar's assassination? What are your thoughts on that?
Okay, well, I think if we look at his failures before we look at any partial successes that they might claim, his failures are the stated aims of the war in Gaza were to release the hostages and to eliminate Hamas as the political and kind of military leaders of the people of Gaza, 2.2 or 2.3 million people who have been suffering under an inhuman siege for the last 17 years, since 2007 up to 2024. So he has failed in his initial military aims and political aims in Gaza, where he has succeeded, if we could use those terms. He has destroyed the infrastructure. He has destroyed 75 to 80% of all the water treatment and sewage facilities. He's using starvation as a weapon of war. They promised before 2007 that at some stage in the future they would turn Gaza into a car park, and that's what they're trying to do. At the minute, in Jabalia, in the refugee camp in northern Gaza, they have surrounded the camp. I think it's for the last 17 days. No food, no aid. Nothing has been able to get in. They've told the people to flee for their lives. The people trying to leave are being murdered. So I've heard it described actually by George Galloway today that originally Gaza was a prison camp. It then became a concentration camp, and it is now a extermination camp. And I think that's probably the best description that I've heard so far of the atrocities, the genocide, and the ethnic cleansing being visited upon the people of Gaza as we speak. Now, as for Lebanon, Hamas has not been defeated in Gaza. The murder and assassination of Yahya Sinwar, who was in full military battle fatigues, He was armed. He was actually in a fight with the Israeli offensive forces when he died as a shaheed, as a martyr, defending his people, defending his family, defending his land, defending the right of the Palestinians to return to their native homes and to defend the sovereignty of the Palestinian state. And the Israelis tried to say he was hiding in a bunker. He was cowering in the dark like some dog hiding from his owner. Nothing could be further from the truth. This is all part of the propaganda war. What's happening in Lebanon? I heard a retired general of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps who put on Twitter recently that they attacked Gaza, and then so you have the axis of resistance, and according to him, they appear to be going after them one at a time. So first it was Gaza. They have leveled Gaza. They have 1.9 billion people living in tents that they're dropping 2,000 and 5,000 pound bombs on and murdering people and mixing their blood with the sands on the fields of Gaza. So they tried to destroy Gaza, and the template for Lebanon appears to be exactly what they've done in Gaza. The fact that they were targeting a hospital yesterday, trying to claim that there was a bunker for Hezbollah underneath the hospital, the same as they claimed and the Al-Shifa hospital when they said Hamas was underneath, a tissue of lies in a war of deceitful propaganda. They are not. They are targeting Hezbollah, but in reality, they are targeting all of Lebanon, and that is Christian, and that is Shia, and that is Sunni, and that is anyone who lives in Lebanon is a potential target. They care nothing for the lives of anyone who is not a Zionist Jew. They care nothing for people of race. In fact, in Israel itself, there is a hierarchy of racism, because while they claim it is a safe haven for Jews from all over the world to escape anti-Semitism, not only are they increasing anti-Semitism throughout the world with this genocidal attack upon Gaza, but the black Ethiopian Jews who migrated, many of them to become servants to wealthy Zionists in Israel, those women, many of whom were given injections that they were told were for the flu or a virus, they were being given the antibodies. They were actually sterilising the women. So racism exists not only against people of colour in the region, but also against people of colour who are Jewish, who migrate to Israel because they're the wrong colour of Jew, because they are black, and it proves the racist, fascist nature of the society within Israel. And just in conclusion, they won't defeat Hezbollah, but we may be watching another genocide in the making, sadly, in Lebanon by this white European colonial racist fascist regime in Tel Aviv, and a regime which merged Israeli society, because not only did they re-elect Netanyahu, and they then brought in Smotrich and Ben Gvir and others who talk about Amalek, about invoking verses from the Talmud or the Torah, that your enemies, man, woman, child, suckling baby, and animal, must be put to the sword. No one must survive. That appears to be the compass that is being used by the IDF. Everyone is your enemy. Kill them all. Kill as many as necessary until we achieve our political goals and our expansionist dreams of a greater Israel.
That's really true. Sister Batul, what are your thoughts on, first of all, as Farah also has described the situation in Gaza and Lebanon, and obviously all this situation apparently, when we look at the situation, it is very, very painful in one way, and the other way it looks like it is uniting all the humanity, because when Farah has described related to the bombing in Lebanon and even in Gaza, we can say there are Christians, there are Jews, there are Muslims, because they don't even care about the Jews who stand against the Zionism, right? So it is some sort of unity we see in one way. And obviously these are oppressive powers, they do have their own goals to achieve. How do you see the Netanyahu stance now, because he thinks he has achieved something very huge after killing of Yahya Sinwar and Shaheed Hassan Nasrallah, obviously. And now when they IDF has shared the video related to Yahya Sinwar's death, last moment of his life, and he was like fighting until his last breath, obviously. And don't you see? Don't you think that he is immortalized by these video clips, and he is something who has become a very huge figure now, because he had an opportunity to save his life, as reports suggest as well, that he was offered a place, like, okay, if you want to move on somewhere else, he said no, I will fight with my own people, and he had been fighting as well. So what do you think after Sinwar, what is his legacy for the people of Palestine, for instance? How the people of Palestine are looked after Yahya Sinwar's assassination?
Absolutely. His legacy, his final image really was of him above the ground. You know, he was wearing a combat vest. He had an AK by his side. In the last moments the world saw of him, you know, he was fighting off a drone with one arm. They couldn't even verify him face to face. That's how coward these baby killers are. And this notion that, you know, Sinwar was hiding behind hostages or used to hide as a woman has been completely shattered. You know, this propaganda notion that the occupation entity would put forward. This man was actually fighting on the front lines, and the occupation soldiers didn't know it. So the battle in which leaders are killed fighting, that's a successful one. Compare it with Netanyahu, that's constantly hiding behind bunkers, that he himself right now is displaced. You know, he claimed that the reason that they, escalated the operations and the movement on the northern front towards Lebanon was because they wanted to return the tens of thousands of, displaced settlers. But it's funny that Netanyahu himself is right now displaced. And there's a real danger on his life, essentially, because he has now become a target. So the morale and spirit that this gives to the resistance fighters when they see their leader standing in those final moments, that multiplies infinitely. The resistance believes that sacrifices are the required price. That's how they know that Palestine is being freed, as long as blood is being given. The resistance has proven again and again that the killing of the leaders only strengthens their movement. We know the Axis on all fronts considers that it's given, martyrs. In these kinds of wars, when sacrifices increase, the results are ultimately greater, not less. This does give the Israeli occupation entity an image of victory, a facade image. That's something that America seeks as well. In my assessment, this will only reduce and not fan the flames of war, especially with the resistance and its collective people remaining steadfast and harming the occupation entity. Lebanon right now is harming Israel big time, is cancelling Netanyahu's strategy. By the end of the election, when the new US administration stabilizes, the US will be in a better position to take decisive decisions. This will become crystal clear when Israel is suffering worse losses due to their expansion of the war into Lebanon than they did in Raza. We've seen that for several months during the onslaught in Raza, America was genuinely calling for a ceasefire. America, it wasn't like it didn't want a ceasefire. If other than Netanyahu was in power, if suppose someone like Lapid or Benny Gantz was in power, because bear in mind that also within Israel itself, there is a spectrum. Netanyahu is on the extreme right that says, at all costs, we need to continue war. This war is a war of survival. Whereas you have those who are on the opposition side, it's not because they care about Palestinian lives and they're not genocidal manics that they wanted a ceasefire, but it's because they saw that the continuation of this war is only shooting Israel in the foot, as Yitzhak Brik, the former major reserve army general of the entity, stated that, if this war continues for 2 more years, the Israeli occupation entity will cease to exist. That's something that Trump also echoed, that if Kamala Harris is in power, then just give it 2 years and Israel will just dwindle into nothingness, because ultimately all it can do is create a fire belt. and is capable of causing mass destruction and is capable of securing quote unquote tactical wins. But on the ground, it's not achieving any one of its goals and objectives. And as long as those rockets from the resistance keep pouring into the occupation entity, you're talking about, for example, today, for one constant hour, you have 1 million settlers who are in, bunker shelters, hiding for their lives. I mean, these settlers came here for a better life. The moment that they feel endangered, the moment that they don't feel protected, the moment they feel like the security apparatus in the entity is not able to intercept the incoming missiles and drones and to protect them, even if they're not the targets, because the resistance doesn't go after settlers, it goes after military targets, in their mind, they're going to feel very unsafe and apprehensive. And this will drive them ultimately to leave in droves. And this will be particularly the case post-war. I think during war, you're in a state of emergency, but post-war, the unraveling and the disintegration of the Israeli occupation entity will be even greater. And so when it's clear to America, because we know that America was the one that gave Israel the green light to go into Lebanon, America's in a position right now, especially during election period, where it's unable or it doesn't want to take kind of decisive decisions, like, for example, pressuring the entity the ceasefire in light of its failures in Gaza, but also because of the very failure of Israel in Gaza. America gave Israel the green light to go into Lebanon to basically restore the deterrence that Israel lost on October the 7th. It's like, if you've managed to achieve nothing on the ground in Gaza, let's see what you're capable of in Lebanon. And so, this past month and a half has just been an expression of Israel trying to restore that deterrence, through the pager attacks, through the assassination on the Secretary General, as you've mentioned. Israel was kind of experiencing this drunken high. We saw him at the UN hold that map, talking about, his visions of this new Middle East, reviving this idea that America had 2 decades ago, on the onset of the war of terror, genuinely believing in its delusional mind that it's able to basically eliminate the resistance. The reality is, if any other organization, or let's say paramilitary, sustained the blows that the Islamic resistance of Lebanon initially went through the assassination of 80% of its frontline commanders, cutting the head off the body, they wouldn't have been likely to maintain their strength and their composure and their ability to continue. But the Islamic resistance of Lebanon has proven that actually its strategy is not hinged with those on the front lines or those top commanders, but they know essentially the line and the trajectory that they're taking, and they don't get dragged into the enemy's squat. So we know that Netanyahu's strategy appears to be determined to toughen the Israeli society up. The public is being conditioned to kind of understand that failure in this war could spell the end of their existence. And for that reason, the Israeli government would rather sustain the losses that Israel is going through now, because they're hefty losses. If we're talking about on the border, for example, it's been over 2 weeks, well over 2 weeks, and they've been unable to go through the Lebanese border successfully. They're essentially getting cooked there. But it's willing to sustain those losses because it considers this war as kind of cementing their existential survival. No one would have anticipated this war to go on for this long, because Israel's incapable of actually succeeding in these kinds of long attrition wars. We know that the settlers, not just the settlers, but the soldiers on the ground, they have zero morale whatsoever. And we know that no war lasts forever. And Israel's only image of facade victory will be killing the leaders of resistance. That's the only thing that they can brag about post-war. And it wasn't even a merit that they managed to kill Sinwar, because it was an accident, But we know that Netanyahu, on top of all of this, his strategy is also to create the most unbearable conditions for the Palestinians. As Ben Gvir consistently talks about, this idea of population transfer, of replaying the Nakba all over again, because Israel ultimately has no post-war plan. And as Farah has mentioned, not a single military strategic objective since the beginning of this war has been met, from the dismantlement of the resistance, which was, the primary goal that they would boast on about, to the release of hostages. It's important for them to release the hostages to display to the Israeli society that actually through war, they are able to achieve their goals and kind of protect the settlers. But we know that Sinwar is gone and the hostages are still captive, essentially.
That's really true, sister. Farah, what are your thoughts? What sister said, it suggests that, uh, the Netanyahu just have to like keep this war ongoing. Obviously, even if he can't, but he has to for the sake of keeping his face, for instance, because he can't finish Hamas or Hezbollah, for instance, from the root by killing just their leaders. So, how do you think what strategy he is going to Israel is going to adopt in order to stay in the war, come out, or are they going to attack Iran? Because at the moment they are in, as sister said, they are drunken high after assassination of the leaders, because they can't even kill them on their own. It was by accident they assassinated Yahya Sinwar, and they killed Sayyid Nasrullah, obviously. And but they other than that, they can't do anything. Like, target killing is not that difficult for anyone who is looking for their target and who wants to achieve such targets. So, what are your thoughts? What strategy Israeli government is going to have to keep it further? And what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think initially their strategy was, you see, there are question marks over how much information they may have had before the Al-Aqsa flood operation. The Egyptians come out shortly afterwards saying, well, we told them something was in the offing, we warned them that there was something being planned. There are stories that the Israeli army was stood down for several hours during Operation Al-Aqsa flood. And it may have suited the long-term interests of Israel to have allowed or partially accepted this operation to have succeeded. And there are numerous reports that many of those killed on the 7th of October were actually killed by the IDF. There is an Israeli member of one of the kibbutz in southern Israel who publicly stated that a group of Hamas fighters had gathered 17 people from her kibbutz in one building. And then when the Israeli troops turned up and they wanted to negotiate, the leader of the Hamas group of resistance fighters walked out with this hostage or captive. He was then summarily executed by the IDF, and she ran towards their ranks. And then instead of negotiating the surrender issue of the resistance fighters, who were then surrounded, the Israelis began a firefight. And after several hours, they called up a tank, and the Israeli commander decided, this has gone on long enough, we're going to finish this. They fired tank shells into the house that had 16 Israeli captives, including old people and children. So that's that Hannibal directive, where they are happy, not happy is the wrong word, they are prepared to assassinate their own people in order not to allow them to become hostages. So that does throw a light onto Netanyahu's response to the hostages that are still being held captive in Gaza. I think in the long run, I think initially they went in, it was bloodlust and revenge, and then they saw an opportunity politically, and they then had the political will that they decided that they were going to destroy Gaza. I think this is actually about destroying Gaza and forcing the people, as Smotrich said recently, it's a classic Israeli propaganda line. Well, perhaps the people would choose to leave voluntarily. I could nearly write their script. They'd probably say, the people in Gaza have been living under a Hamas dictatorship for 19 years, well, 17 years since 2007. This is their opportunity no longer to be used as human shields by Hamas, no longer to live under this Islamic dictatorship, and that these people given the opportunity to go and have a beautiful life somewhere else in safety. And that's what he's pushing. He's looking for the total removal of everyone in Gaza, which is part of the greater Israeli plan. If you remember, in 1948, originally they were to get something like 52% of the land of Palestine, even though they made up only like 15% of the population at that time. They ended up with 78% after the 1967 war. I think they have 82% now of historic Palestine. Gaza is 26 miles by 5 miles. It's a tiny slither of land. that has the highest concentration of people, as we know, in the world. And they were living with the Israelis counting how many calories could be allowed into the enclave in order for people basically to survive. I always compare the Gaza Strip with the Warsaw Ghetto. It's exactly the same mentality. The Warsaw Ghetto, where the Jews were surrounded by German fascists, they decided who could come to work, who could come out for medical aid, how much food went in and out of the Warsaw Ghetto. And it's exactly what the Israelis did to Gaza for the last 17 years, since Hamas was democratically elected in a plebiscite by the people of Palestine, both in the West Bank and in Gaza, to be their political representatives. The Americans, the EU and Israel in 2007 called for democratic elections. They said they had no partner for peace. Unbelievable what they say. No partner for peace on the Palestinian side because it was fractured politically, and they wanted one voice to speak for the people of Palestine. The people elected Hamas, but the election results didn't suit the EU, didn't suit America, didn't suit Israel. So all of a sudden they said, well, yes, we wanted you to have a democratic election. Yes, you've had a democratic election, but we are not prepared to accept the results of the democratic vote and the will of the people of Palestine to have Hamas represent them. And that's when the siege started. So from where I'm sitting, thousands of miles away, peacefully in my home, no drones above my house, no bombs going off. I'm not worried about putting on the kettle and having a cup of tea, going to the fridge and having something to eat. These people are destitute and desperate because that is what the Israeli and the American administration are putting them through. I think what they want to do is they want to clear northern Gaza. They always talk about a buffer zone down to the Wadi. I heard a Palestinian woman speaking. He was fleeing from the Jabalia refugee camp. She said that it was so unsafe for people to walk or try and retrieve the wounded or the dead that the dogs were eating the bodies of women lying dead in the street. I've heard this before, but I actually heard a woman, a refugee, fleeing for her life from northern Gaza, state publicly on Press TV or Al Jazeera that this is what was happening on the ground. What kind of a world do we live in where people who have been maimed and are allowed to die and bleed out on the streets are then their bodies are eaten by animals who are starving as well because of the situation that's going there? I think their plan, whether or not they succeed, is different. I think their plan is they want Gaza totally evacuated. I mentioned 48 and 67 and how Israel has increased its foothold within historic Palestine. Israel was born through terrorism, it exists through terrorism, and it expands through terrorism. So terrorism being visited upon the people of Gaza, if they succeed in getting them out, and I pray, inshallah, that they do not, but that is the final plan, get them out of Gaza. So first they attack Gaza, going in turn after the different members of the Axis of Resistance. So first Gaza, then and even if they don't get everyone out, they will have 2 million people living in tents. They will stay in the Philadelphia corridor, so there will be no relief and nothing coming through Egypt without Israeli oversight. So we're looking at potentially 2 million people corralled into the smallest possible living space imaginable, with no education, with no healthcare, with no food, no sewage, with no sanitation, and the Israelis just standing in the background with their tanks and their guns. There may be, I lived through a conflict here for 25 years in the north of Ireland. The British had a strategy where they couldn't defeat the Irish Republican national liberation struggle, but they had a policy of containment. So long as they could contain the violence to a certain level, it was called an acceptable level of violence. And that might be what the Israelis are looking at in Gaza. When it comes to Lebanon, they're just going to bomb everything and everyone. The very fact that they bombed an escape route between Lebanon and Syria, that main highway, it was the N4, I've actually gone from Beirut to Damascus, so I know it quite well. They bombed that in order to prevent people fleeing for safety. They bombed that in order to prevent the Syrian army, I assume, at some stage, if they were maybe intending to come forward to help defend Lebanon. So history has shown us that they destroyed Libya, that they destroyed Iraq. They tried to destroy and have, in effect, balkanized Syria. So they're just going after every country, sovereign nation, Arab, Islamic, Muslim, and they are looking to reoccupy the West Asia region the way the British and the French did after the First World War. You had the mandates and the spheres of influence all across the Levant. You had the same in Africa, where they occupied it, carved it up, balkanized all the countries, made different nations and different tribal sects live together uneasily. And they created minority governments where say the majority were Shia, so they put in a Sunni leadership and vice versa in different countries and created the Gulf countries. I think America and Israel see this as their opportunity to redo their new Middle East. If you remember what they did in Latin America in the 70s, they had dictatorships and coups and military takeovers one after another. They murdered Che Guevara, they murdered Allende. When you mentioned Yahya Sinwar, I have that gentleman in the same iconic place as Che Guevara and as Allende in Chile, and with President Raisi, who died. I heard some of his speeches after he had died. A fantastic humanitarian man who stood for his people against oppression, and that's what the Palestinians. They are the frontline people who are standing up against the fascism in the world today. But the Israelis want to, if they can't control everything, they will destroy it. They will bomb as much as they can. They will kill as many people as they can. If they call a ceasefire tomorrow, Gaza is still flattened. 2 million people are still in tents. They have destroyed a proportion of the Lebanese infrastructure already. And just in conclusion, when it comes to America, these are American bombs. These are American planes. When we saw the war on Iraq with shock and awe, when I watched the bombings of Beirut recently, that is exactly what came into my mind as soon as I saw the bombings. I thought, this is being directed more by America than it is by Israel. Israel's pulling the trigger, but I believe America is directing the war. They are in Lebanon right now, politically, trying to re-sow the seeds of division that were previously ignited for the civil war between the Christian Phalange and the likes of Hezbollah and the other movements that pre-existed Hezbollah. So it's not as if the Americans want a ceasefire. It's not as if Netanyahu's just kind of rogue, psychotic guy. Oh, I can't keep him under control. If it was somebody else, we might be able to do something. I think from the very start of this, and now this is hindsight, but from the very start, I think America has created a space by saying we don't want a further regional war, we don't want Lebanon getting involved, we don't want Iran getting involved, we don't want Yemen getting involved, we don't want Iraq getting involved. This is something between the Israelis and the Palestinians, and just let them get on with it. We don't want a larger regional war. What they've done was they created a space for 12 months for the Israelis to carry out this genocidal ethnic cleansing of Gaza, with the intention, when that was over, or when it was containable, that they would then go on to Lebanon. The excuse being that we must, if you don't allow our people to go back, knowing that Hezbollah wouldn't accept that, if you don't allow our people to go back, we will be de facto in a state of war with you. And that's what they've done. Whether or not they're going to attack Iran, they already appear to have their plans. America has tried to play this role that for decades they have been the arbiters of peace. They tried to bring about arbitration, the Oslo Agreement, the agreement between Sadat and whoever that was, the Israeli guy, who ended up losing his life over signing those agreements in Washington all those decades ago. America tries to say they're a peace broker. If Biden said tomorrow on the telephone, no more bombs, no more bullets, no more finances, no more political cover in the UN, I want you to bring this to an end, it would finish. The fact that the Americans don't want it to finish tells you all you need to know, that everything happening there is in the interests of American, Western, white, Anglo-Saxon, hegemonic kind of overview and overseeing of events in the Middle East and West Asia. And Joe Biden said on 2 occasions, if Israel didn't exist, they would have to invent it because they need a footprint within the region to divide the Ummah in order to have people at each other's throats. They, in Iraq, when the first time I heard that there was a bomb outside the Shia mosque, a car bomb, something you never heard in Iraq, something that you might have heard in Western Europe, something that might have happened here in my hometown, that was used so that instead of the Iraqi people coming together to fight the invasion, they ended up fighting each other in a sectarian war. That's divide and rule. That's what the imperialists do. And I think the short-term plan for Lebanon is to try to bomb the civilian people into submission and into surrender, while in the background they try and bring about regime change. They're already saying Lebanon doesn't have a president, we must have elections. They're going to try and marginalise Hezbollah from the political sphere, and they're going to try and put in their own puppet people. And all this talk about, you know, the Lebanese army, which only exists on paper, taking over the southern border up to the Pani River so that there's no Hezbollah. This is all just smoke and mirage. They want to control Lebanon, and I sadly think that they do intend to attack Iran, and I think that America, if this does happen, America will lead them, and it's a question of how the Iranian people can survive against an onslaught of the world's superpower.
Thank you, Farah. You have explained so in very deep in your deep analysis. We do have Brother Mohsin as well. Assalamu alaikum, Mohsin bhai. Thank you so much for joining us today as well. What are your thoughts on the current situation? How do you see this conflict going, especially the situation in Gaza and Lebanon, especially as Farah and Sister Batul mentioned some of the most important aspects related to United States policy. Apparently they do kind of lip service. They ask them not to escalate and all that, but obviously they are providing weapon and everything. So do you think where the situation is going, are we going to see any kind of ceasefire? Are we going to see any pause in this whole situation? What are your thoughts on Yahya Sinwar's assassination, and how do you see the oncoming future of the region especially? Do you think there is a future war coming on, especially between Iran and US? Maybe they are trying to gain some time through this bombing and all that bloodshed within the region, and after election they might be going to go for a certain decision, as our prestigious guest also suggested such things. So what are your thoughts on the situation?
Yes, well, Assalamu alaikum, and my greetings to Brother Farah and also Sister Batul. I'm sure that they've already outlined everything that I'd probably want to say because they're both very admirable commentators and they know their stuff. But for my tuppence worth, essentially the war has begun a long time ago. The war began when the NAQVI basically was executed. The war was declared on the Muslim world through British colonialism. For 200 years. They declared war on the entire people of the world, essentially, and it's been handed over to the American imperialists. What's the difference? First of all, I cannot see the difference between British colonialism, British imperialism, and then American neo-imperialism that's emerged. And I don't see the difference between what we've got in this 21st century emerging with the new world order and the money mafia, money lenders' plans for their great reset. So it's all business as usual for the same despicable, evil, nasty kind of parasites that cause all conflict, all wars, through their greed and through their absolute avarice, through their paranoia, through their desire to control the world. And today it's just Gaza, which is the latest in the line of a whole litany of genocides. You know, I could go back to the genocides of the Belgian king, the same imperialist colonialists in the Congo. I could go to the British famine, the induced famine in the Bengal, where 10, 11 million Bengalis were starved by Winston Churchill, the great hero of the Second World War to the West, an absolute butcher and maniac to the rest of the world. And this is how perceptions are tweaked by those who win wars. And it's often said history is written by the victor. The victors of the Second World War were the Western puppets of the same moneylender mafia that was probably doing the dirty work behind Hitler in creating that Second World War. But that's a long story. So first of all, contextualize this to say that mass murder, genocide, starvation, famine, they did it with my brother Farah's people in Ireland. You know, the so-called potato famine was an induced imperialist, genocide. That's what it was. But then it gets painted as something else. So I'm afraid there are so many cases. Whether I want to go to the hidden American Indian or Native American genocide by the Americans, I could tell you that actually psychologically and as a root cause of today's genocidal American output in Gaza, because they're the ones who are really doing this war. This is an American war. This is a Western establishment Zion moneylender war. It's not an Israeli war. It's not the war of Benjamin Netanyahu. This is all obfuscation. The reality is it's a continuity of imperialist wars, and the reality is that they just find new methods of being terrorists, new methods of genocide, new methods of extermination, new forms of Holocaust. Let's now appropriate that word, which they took over just to guilt trip the whole of Europe into allowing Zionism to take place. And let's look at the fact that it is the British who created this legacy of the Nakba. It's the British American interest which has maintained it. They now continue to fund openly the genocide and try to justify it and obfuscate it. Their media, their cheap prostitute media, rolls out all the justifications and looks more and more stupid and ridiculous by the day. And all that's happening now is that the front line of this war, this perennial war on imperialism and fascism and totalitarianism and this kind of greed, is being led by the axis of resistance. There are many other people who are in that resistance, and they are white, black, brown. They are oppressed people across the world, whether it's Venezuelans or whether it's the downtrodden here in Britain, whether it's the people who are being exploited by Westminster or the City of London in London, or whether it's the people being exploited by Wall Street in America and the resistance of the students out there in the universities for Gaza, but other oppressed around the world. Whether it's the Kashmiris who aren't being given their rights by the Indian totalitarian terrorists, or whether it's the Saudis bombing Yemen and destroying it on behalf of the Anglo-Zionist Empire. These are all the same wars. They are all part of the same syndicate, the same mafia. And I think that the Gazans are the latest iteration, but the most vivid one, along with our Lebanese brothers. Because now we have videos, we have mobile phones, we have communication mechanisms which allow us to at least be able to tell our story straight away. Yes, the censorship and the algorithms and your Facebooks, your Instagrams, they're all part of that war. They are all also supporting that war, and they suppress and censor our words. They hound us out of the spaces. They destroy any chance of us getting our word out properly. But nonetheless, still, there are so many hundreds of millions of people that have real good hearts around the world who are part of this resistance, who keep sharing, who keep fighting, who keep protesting, who keep boycotting, who keep trying to keep the issue of oppressed people, especially the Gazans and the Lebanese issue, alive, that it's so hard for them to control. And now let me come on to another part of your question. Look, on the ground, they're losing. Whilst their media and all of their political prostitutes that actually push out their narratives, like Keir Starmer or your Bidens or whatever, these puppets, they would have you believe that they are winning. They are not winning. They are losing. They cannot get any ships through the Bab el-Mandeb because of the axis of resistance. Any ship that goes through here which belongs to them gets bombed, and they have not been able to prevent that, even though they're using bunker bombs and trying to kill the Yemenis. The Yemenis have not backed down. 20% of the goods and services into Israel have been affected. They're basically economically they're bankrupt already. They would be, but the Americans are printing free money. You know this business of free printing. You just print money like nobody's business with no consequences. That's what the money lenders do. So they print dollars and they pump them into the Israelis to artificially maintain this economy. Otherwise, the reality is they've got over 500,000 unemployed. They've got 500,000 others who had to go and join the reserves of the Israelis. So they've got at least a 10th or 20% of their population, which is now not doing the jobs they would have wanted. Over 140,000 businesses have completely shut down. Another 40 to 60,000 are anticipated to shut down over the next 6 months. That's economically completely unviable in the long run. The north and the south, now those who were displacing, the settlers who were displacing the Palestinians whose right it is to be in that land, are now displaced because of Hezbollah and the Palestinian resistance and their ability to fire rockets and missiles. So they've got an exodus going on out of Ben Gurion airport, which is hugely covered up, but there are plane loads. Now at least a million have already left their dual identity nations like Romania or the Ukraine or America or Britain. So this is all going on as well. The reputation of Israel across the world absolutely is in tatters. There is no credibility left for Israelis other than their control of the media, and that they artificially have these bots and try to make out that they support Israel. And if you go and put things on things like TikTok and Twitter, you'll see their trolls hound you and they start deluging anything you say. But this is all a sign that they are losing, and they're so fearful, and they're so trying to get control of the situation, and they're failing miserably. So on social media, people have also discovered the reality, and Israel will never have the credibility that it once had through its Israeli Hasbara. They will never, ever, ever be able to come back and to look the world in the face and say they are a credible, sane, human, civilized setup. These are the biggest nails in the coffin for Israel. Not necessarily an out-and-out war, although that war is looming. And even if they go for that war, my firm belief is that when you fight a people who are fighting for their faith and for a cause and for a real something really means something to them, they will give their lives. And what you're talking about in Iran is about 40 million people who have military service under their belt, are geared towards fighting in war, and they're rattling the cage of a people who they should remember that when Saddam had chemical weapons and he was firing them over the lines, they should remember that the Islamic Republic of Iran's ill-equipped fighters were still going over the trenches, and they were fighting the American weaponized machine of Saddam at that time and the chemically armed machine of the Iraqi forces, which were fighting on the Zionist imperialist Western Empire's behalf. And they could not defeat Iran then, not with that invasion of Saddam at that time. They will not be able to achieve that goal even this time, because Iran is infinitely more powerful. They have everything potentially from radar mechanisms. There's now talk of the S-400s being deployed by the Russians in Iran. There's talk of laser weapons that are emerging that Iran has at its disposal. They have a defense network which is formidable, and they are on the cusp of being able to just bring together the nuclear option. They've now said that is on the table. If Israel starts throwing around its threats of a nuclear Samson, option, then Iran will bring out its own option of like for like. So the Americans have to view all this. And yes, the saber rattling is happening. Yes, I agree with Farah. I think there will be a push for war. Reason is this. Israel knows that if it leaves the Islamic Republic of Iran and the axis of resistance for another 5 to 10 years, then all you've got to look at is the track record of Iran over the last 30 to 40 years and the progress technologically, scientifically, militarily, educationally, politically, economically, industrially, And you will recognize that actually, if the same trajectory continues, Iran will be such a superpower, it will be such a handful, that it will be absolutely impossible for a minnow like Israel to even conceive of taking on they can't take them on now even. They need the Americans to come and do it, but it would even be a deterrent for the Americans to consider doing so. And the Americans have to take note that Russia and China are watching. And Russia and China will not stand on the sidelines, I believe, in any war. They won't allow Iran to fall in front of the Americans. They didn't allow Syria to fall. Putin, when it came push to shove, he stepped in Syria, and the Air Force came in, and they gave the ISIS mercenaries of the Western regimes a bloody nose, and they pinned them up. Now, if they were to push too far, and Putin was to lose his hold in West Asia, or the Chinese were to lose their hold as a trading option with their Belt Road Initiative, does one really think that they're going to stand by and not support the Islamic Republic and the axis of resistance? I would argue that most of some of the sophisticated weaponry that's available to the Eurasian axis would all be available to Iran. Hypersonic missiles have already arrived. There's huge indications that hypersonic missiles may not have been achieved by Iran alone. It could well be that there's a collaboration going on with the only other two powers that have hypersonic weaponry, China and Russia. So these hints should be taken by the Americans, and no doubt their CIA intelligence and the Mossad know all this, but they're caught between a rock and a hard place. If they don't act now, they have to accept Iran as the major player in West Asia, and they have to accept the axis of resistance and its terms and conditions. And one of those terms and conditions is no more apartheid. The dismantling of the Zionist apartheid state is an absolute non-negotiable reality. You cannot have a racist, apartheid, ethno-supremacist conflict machine in the middle of West Asia and expect the people to live peacefully. That will not be allowed to exist. There is rapprochement rapidly developing between the very scared Saudi Arabians and Qataris and others who know that all of their countries will be roped into any American action against America. So they're pulling their feet, and they've already just announced that I've heard the Saudis are involved in some naval exercises with the Islamic Republic of Iran today. So there's increasing indication that they're partners in crime in that region, the Egyptians, the Jordanians, the Qataris, because don't forget, the Qataris are employed to fund ISIS and fund the war on Syria. They were the prime culprits there. The Saudis were primed to destroy the Yemenis, and then from Iraq it was meant to be ISIS, which was meant to take on Iran as well, ultimately, once they'd taken the caliphate over in Iraq. All of that failed. They will fail again. They will, if they go on a ground war, which I think the Americans will find impossible to win in the region, they will, by doing a ground war, they would mobilize the entire West Asia axis on the ground in a war against a set of Americans that have never won a war in my living memory. They haven't won in Afghanistan. They didn't win in Syria. They didn't win in Iraq. Where have they won a war? They couldn't win wars against tin pot, armies. How are they going to win a war against a fully primed 2 million strong IRGC and Iranian army crack force of warriors who are basically faced trenches and warfare in Iraq and aren't scared of chemical weapons, aren't scared of death, have a martyrdom concept right at the heart of their faith, and know that they are on the right side of history, and know that whatever they do is for the oppressed. I cannot see in any scenario Israel and America winning any war. If they're foolish enough to tempt fate and to go for it, they're only going to speed up America's demise in West Asia. They're only going to speed up the total annihilation and destruction of Israel. That's not just pie in the sky. It's backed up by the realities of the last 20 years of the war between the axis of resistance and the U.S. imperialist proxies. America, if it launches its naval bases, they'll get one shot. They can fire some nukes maybe, or whatever they want to do once. After that, every one of their bases, every one of their 5th Fleet and their 6th Fleet will be absolutely out of commission. And then they'll have no naval power, no ability there. And I wouldn't give the Israeli army much chance if all of the axis of resistance with their 300,000 strong soldiers force, which is encircling Israel now, through the Iraqi PMUs, through the Lebanese resistance, through the Yemenis, through the Iranians themselves, and the Syrian army. I would not give Israel much chance with its kind of whatever 40 or 50 kilometers from the river to the sea, or whatever it is that they call it. The borders that they have are very narrow. I wouldn't give them much chance to prevent Israel being split into two and an entire deluge. That might take time, but actually a war on the ground means you have to have an army that can fight, an army that will sustain a war and be able to contain 10, 11 million Palestinians who they've encircled. If all of those Palestinians are armed and the full force of the axis of resistance arrives and an entire battle ensues, I don't see how Israel can survive. And I think that they should, personally, if I was them, I'd cut their losses and settle for what I've got, because really that's all they're going to have. They can give up on the dreams of greater Israel. That's just a dream which Netanyahu has every night, and every morning he gets up and it gets shattered again. But he still seems to be persisting along with the other deluded folk in America. But anyhow, I mean, this is my assessment. There is very likely to be an ongoing exchange, because Israel thinks and America thinks it's fighting for its control of the West, and they take 100% of Iraqi oil money. They take 80% of the Syrian oil money. They take all of the Saudi Arabian oil cash, all of the rest of the oil from that region, Qatars and Kuwait's. So they've got a lot to lose. You're talking about trillions of dollars of wealth which they stand to lose. That's why they're fighting there. That's why they feel they have to take the axis of resistance on, because they are leeching and blood-sucking the life out of the West Asia in terms of resources, and it's with those resources that they then feed the rest of their imperialist ambitions. But they don't feed their own poor people in America, the drug addicts and all those poor people who don't get Medicare, and all the unemployed and all their people who are suffering. Notice that money is being drained by somebody other than the American people, because the American people aren't getting it. There's a $30 trillion debt on the American people's heads, which is something that they'll be called out for when the time is right by the money lenders. But right now, they're willing to use whatever money they're looting from the rest of the world to put into their own coffers. Goodness knows where they put it. I don't know how many Van Gogh paintings they need to invent as trillionaire, as priceless, and how many real estates they have to pick up, or how many ways they have to hide all this ill-gotten gains, how many Cayman Island accounts they have to go and stuff it all into. But what will they do with all this money? These evil, poverty-inducing, war-inducing, warmongering criminals are responsible for the woes of all of the world. I mean, I put it at their doorstep. And the Americans, and the Israelis, these are just boots on the ground that are there to do the orders of the same leeches. And I think the people in the West need to wake up, that they need to stop voting in these puppets. They need to recognize that the people of City of London and Wall Street and all those background boys, these are the problem. And the more you bow to them, they are not your friends. They're already putting us in austerity here. They've done it for the last 20 years. They're downgrading our own economies here. They're making us fight over migrants. They're putting the emphasis on migrants as being the problem, when the problem is really them. They are the ones who are creating poverty, wars to create migrants. They're the ones who are robbing all the money. They're the ones imposing the taxes. They're the ones printing money, over-printing money, or not printing money. And I think until the world wakes up to these realities and stops being just a bunch of drones and listening to mainstream media and fearing for their jobs, unless they tackle the root of the problems, whether they're Arabs or whether they're British or Americans, these moneylender mafia and their puppets will continue dividing us, making us fight, and ruling over us, and really basically making the world an extraordinarily difficult place to live in, with absolutely an easy place, because God has given us in abundance. There is more than enough in this world to go around for everybody. It's these people, it's these money lenders who created the conditions to make it look like the planet doesn't have enough to sustain us. Absolute baloney. It's all on them, FAIZA.
Thank you so much, Muslim Bhai, and thank you so much, Sister Batul, and thanks a lot, Farah. I'm really honored to have you all on the show. Time is really going very fast, so I'm really glad you all shared your opinion and deep analysis on the on this topic. Thanks a lot for that. And to the viewers, I would say we all need to wake up and look at the reality and then work for towards the truth and justice and peace of this world, because our generations are supposed to suffer if we won't do that. I'll take a leave now, and inshallah see you next week. Allah Hafiz.